Hi there everybody, and welcome back to my channel After Dark Coffee and Crime. If you are a regular here, it's always good to see you back here with me again and chit-chatting with you guys. And if you are new, hi and a very warm welcome. And we are growing each week. We are a new channel, but we are a friendly bunch when we are chatting during the premiere. If you are here for the live chat, just to make you aware that obviously any timestamps will only cover elements on a replay, because obviously this will be streaming live as a premiere. So if there's something about to come up that you're not able to listen to, just avert your eyes, turn off the volume, and then pop back in a couple of minutes. Usually there's a segment or two that might be a bit too much for people to watch, then that's fine, but obviously if you are on the replay, the timestamp will be there for you to skip forward. So in today's case, I will be looking at the murder of Sarah Everard, who was brutally murdered by a man by the name of Wayne Couzens, who was a serving police officer at the time that he carried out her murder. And the murder took place in March 2021. And this would have been during the lockdown period that we had here in the UK as well. So we are looking at now in 23, it'll be 2 years since she was murdered. As with all the videos, I like to just give a content warning, because as you know, with the nature of cases, it is true crime. It is, there are the things that we're going to touch on that aren't going to be for everybody, but we do discuss issues of violence, unaliving, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, and crime scene details we often touch on as well. And so some of these topics may not be suited to everybody. They may be quite triggering for some people, so obviously viewer discretion is advised. But if it's something that you aren't able to watch right now, come out with this podcast, and hopefully there will be one there for you that you'll be able to listen to. And then obviously hopefully we will see you in the next live premiere that we have running. And with all of the information that I share on my podcast, I do like to just point out as well that the information is things that I have researched, I found on the internet, from books, news articles. If you're in America, they often have discoveries for their cases, so I will look through those and pull out relevant information. Or it may be that I've listened to court hearings and watched them unfold and taken details, so when I'm able to cover the case, I have a good idea and a good background in that field, and this is so that I can compile the most accurate account of what happened for you, share the victim story, as well as giving you the most reliable information, which is designed to be for information and educational purposes only. And hopefully it'll then we'll take out the the facts of the case and put it in an order and make it so that it's easy for you to follow. The information that we discuss in the case is not designed to cause upset to anyone, and there are people who may have experienced similar things to the cases that we talk about. The victims' families may be watching, their friends may be watching. So if, we're chatting in chat, please do remain respectful, because we never know who is watching. Like I say, I say this every time, we don't want to upset anybody who may have experienced something very similar to this, or if their families or friends of the victims are watching. So please do remain respectful in chat, because we don't, we're telling the victim's story, we don't know who is watching, and it isn't our place to judge anybody. So please do remain respectful. So now that I've covered the introduction, I'm going to talk a little bit about Sarah Everard. So who was she? So Sarah was born in Surrey in the UK in June 1987, and she actually grew up in York. And Sarah was 33 years old at the time that she was murdered, and she lived in Brixton in South London. She graduated from St Cuthbert's Society, Durham University in 2008, and this was before she then moved to London to start working as a marketing executive. So you can see that Sarah is a bright young lady. She had everything to live for, with a bright future ahead. And Sarah was described to be someone who actually loved life. She embraced everything that it had to offer her, and she would, involve herself in any experience that came her way. She'd try it, she'd want to, experience it and not let, these things pass her by. She considered London to be her home. Sarah was a younger sister, so the baby sister of the family, the youngest daughter. She was someone's best friend, she was someone's soulmate and a colleague, and people that came into contact with her, enjoyed her company. She was really good at anything she put her hands to, but they kind of joked that she wasn't so great at karaoke, but that didn't stop her. She still participated in karaoke, which is something that I would never do because my singing is terrible, but it just gives you an overview in how she liked to live her life to the fullest. And like most people, Sarah had lots of dreams. She had dreamt of getting married. She wanted to welcome generations of children into the family. She was saving to buy a house for her family that she wanted to have, and while she was waiting for the house, to have the money for the house, she took an apartment that was tiny because she was sleeping in a room that was tiny, and they said it was like 6 feet away from her washing while she slept, so not ideal. But in the meantime of trying to save money up and stuff to buy the house that she wanted for her family that she was planning for, she worked really hard. Her and her sisters had been planning adventures abroad. Don't blame her, the world is massive, and I can see why she would want to do that. And she would have travel companions in her sisters, and they used to talk excitedly about being bridesmaids for each other's, and obviously being aunties to each other's babies. So they were really excited about the potential of what life was going to look for them in the future. And you can see how bright she was. She was a happy woman, and she had so much to live for and so many plans that she didn't get to, participate in. And her sisters used to say that they were going to grow old together. However, at the age of 33, and I can totally relate to this, the thought of growing old for Sarah would have been light years away, and she and her sister were determined to see who would get the most wrinkles first, especially first, but who would end up having the most wrinkles. Her older work friend was a girl named Holly, and she described Sarah as someone who was like sunshine and light, and she made you feel warm and good and safe, and she wasn't even halfway through the journey in her life. And that kind of sums up the person that Sarah Everard was, because you can see she lives life happily, and she actually makes a difference to her friends, how people's day go, because if she can make someone smile, that's not something that everyone can do, but she gave off this warm feeling, and people felt good and safe around her. Another way they described Sarah was as nice and and good for people that she was, and the life that she embraced. They also said she was strongly minded, she had strong principles, and she knew right from wrong, and she lived by those values, and that was from her mum. And so even though she was this bright person. Some people might mistake that as like someone being a little bit on the too kind soft side, but actually no, she just made, you know, the world a different place for the people who were around her, who she knew. But she had strong principles, and she knew what she wanted, and she was strong, and she fought for the things that she wanted. So what happened to Sarah? What happened to Sarah was absolutely tragic, and it is unimaginable. And we're now going to go through what happened in a timeline, and obviously where there needs to be a warning or a timestamp, I will put it through as we go along. So obviously, as I said, just remember, if you are watching this live, you'll be watching it live, so the timestamp won't apply. But if you're watching on the replay, obviously it will. So obviously, if it's live, please do just avert your eyes and your ears, and then tag back in a bit further on down the line. So on March the 3rd, Sarah was walking home from her friend's house in Clapham, which is in South London. And this journey should have only taken her about 50 minutes, and it was around a 2.5 mile journey. So for Sarah, it was a straightforward walk home from her friends. So she set off on her trek back home around 9 p.m. and actually on the way walking back home, she called her boyfriend, and they were speaking on the phone for about 15 minutes of that time, and the conversation ended at 9:28 p.m. and Sarah was last seen on Poinders Road, which was not far from Clapham Common. She was captured on a doorbell camera as she was walking in the direction to Tulse Hill, and then she was gone. So as we know, as I just said, the doorbell camera obviously caught her walking, and not long after that, a police car passes at around 21:34, and the dash cam of the police car also catches Sarah. And then moments later, after the police car, there is a bus that passes, and on this bus it has a dash cam on it, and it captures the moment that she was intercepted by Wayne Couzens. And Wayne Couzens, as I said, was a serving police officer in Balham, South London, and it was his job role that he used to his advantage. So just to touch on Wayne Couzens before we get into the case, and as we go through there will be more that unfolds, but just to begin with, Wayne Couzens was born in 1972, so obviously he was a lot older than Sarah, and he was a serving Metropolitan Police Constable, and he was also a firearms officer at the time of Sarah's murder, and he joined the Metropolitan from the Civil Nuclear Constabulary in September 2018, which was in Norfolk, which isn't too far from me. I think it's probably around one of the nuclear power stations that we have here. And in February 2020, he was then assigned to Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Branch, or the branch, and the division responsible for uniform protection of government and diplomatic premises. So you can see that he's worked in the police force for quite some time. He's had quite a considerable background. He's not just your sort of average Bobby on your beat. He's a firearms officer. He's worked around Parliament and things like that. However, Couzens had not undergone any enhanced vetting as part of his recruitment, which I find absolutely incredible that this was not done. He's joining the police force, and if you're going to be in the police force and you are going to wear a uniform and serve the public and protect them, surely vetting is essential. We vet people for childcare, we vet people for working in hospitals, we vet them. So how did he not get get this type of vetting. Now, Wayne Couzens also didn't go through the normal 2-year mandatory 2-year probation period with the Metropolitan Police before he then joined, obviously, the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Police. So how could he work in these roles and not have been vetted? It is just shocking. And it's transpired that over the 3 times in different forces, he's had concerning behaviour, and obviously they're going to come out more as we talk about the case. But it just shocks me that he was able to do this without actually being fully vetted and actually being made to do the mandatory probation period. It's just shocking. So from the first contact that Wayne Couzens had with Sarah, her kidnapping took less than 5 minutes. Couzens parked his Vauxhall car on the pavement outside Poinders Court, and he had stopped Sarah, and he'd actually abused his status as a police officer to falsely arrest Sarah Everard. He claimed that she had violated COVID restriction rules. He obviously had his warrant card and flashed that, and he handcuffed her, and then he coaxed her into what was actually a rental vehicle, which I'll talk about in a moment. And he faked the arrest, and she was a random victim, so it wasn't someone that he'd been watching and stalking. It was just that Sarah was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he became his chosen target. So the crime we can argue it was premeditated, it was thoroughly planned out, and he knew what he was doing. I believe he knew what he was doing, and here I'm going to go through all the steps, and then you'll see as we go through the types of planning that he made. There were errors that he made, and the judge actually made a comment on the behaviours and what he thought as to whether or not this was premeditated and planned. So we'll start going through those now, and you will see, even though as a police officer, he wasn't actually that smart. So we know he's hired this vehicle, and he's picked up Sarah, and he transfers her into his own car. So the journey starts when he takes her back to his own car. He drives the Kent route, and he takes her to Dover. When he gets to Dover, he then transfers Sarah Couzens into his own Seat car, and this is where he is a bit lacking and a bit callous, because he hasn't considered the car cameras, the bus cameras. He didn't consider his cell phone connecting to different cell sites, and he also didn't count on CCTV picking him up either. So obviously, as this transpired out and during the investigation, they were then able to track movements from obviously all of those sources. After the transfer into his car, between 11:53 p.m. and 1:57 a.m. on the 4th of March, it is documented that Wayne Couzens' mobile phone connects to the cell sites in the area of Sibbetswold, driving poor Sarah to a rural and secluded woodland near Hodes Wood. And this is where he raped Sarah before murdering her and strangling her with his police issue belt. At 02:31 a.m. in the morning, he stops to buy some water, some apple juice and Lucozade, some hot chocolate, coconut milk and a Bakewell tart in the Costa. And around an hour later, he's then caught on CCTV near the crime scene. He eventually has to return the car rental at 8:30 a.m. and this is just after he'd made a call to his veterinarian to get some medication for his dog. And so for Wayne, it seems like his life has resumed as normal. He's gone back, on his way back from having killed Sarah. He's eating, he's drinking, which for me, that wouldn't, I think if I did that, I would not be able to eat and drink. Like, I think I would feel very sick after doing something like that. But he drops that car back, and he then uses his personal car, and when he is back in his car, he actually tries to ditch Sarah's phone. And on March the 5th, Wayne Couzens calls in sick from work, and he says that it's because he is under stress. And it is then later that he is caught on CCTV purchasing a can of petrol from a service station and some rubble bags from a hardware store in Dover in Kent. He then goes back to where he had left her, and he uses the petrol to burn both her body and her possessions, and he does this in the refrigerator in the area in a woodland that he actually owned a bit of, or near where he had left her. And he then transferred the remains of the crime scene into a pond using the the bags that he'd bought from the hardware store. Now, Sarah isn't the kind of person that doesn't show up when she says she's going to show up, and she's not the kind of person that doesn't respond to messages from her friends or her boyfriend. And so because she didn't, and because she didn't meet her boyfriend the next day after him trying to get hold of her the day before and not reading and responding to his messages, and she had a client meeting on the next day and she didn't show up for that either. And so obviously that then prompted him to go to the police, because obviously he then began to worry, and her friends obviously and her family worried. And obviously we know now that they had every right to be worried about what had happened to her and where she was. On the 7th of March, sickeningly, Wayne Couzens takes his family, so his wife and children, on a day out to the same area in the wooded area where he poured the petrol and burnt Sarah's body. And I don't know what kind of person does that, because there's going to be like a burning smell, and although they wouldn't have seen Sarah's body, who knows what they might have seen. And the fact, even if there was nothing there to be seen and it was just the smell of the burnt out fridge, who would want their children to go exploring around an area where you've murdered somebody and burnt their body? That's some kind of arrogance in that man for doing that. And he must have got some sort of satisfaction knowing that he'd taken his family right near where he had done what he had done to Sarah. That's the only reason that he could have done that, because he could have taken them anywhere, but he chose to take them to not far from the scene of the crime. Whether that was to disturb the scene of the crime, I don't know, or the area, I don't know. But he did, and that is just wrong on every level as far as I'm concerned. Wayne Couzens was supposed to then return back to work on the 8th of March, but again he called in sick, and he also reported that he no longer wished to carry a firearm, and he tried to wipe his phone before he was actually arrested. And in the end, they did actually come to arrest him at his home on the 9th of March, firstly on the suspicion of kidnap. So as you can see, I'm now going to play the clip of his arrest, and you can see exactly what he says as his excuse for having been caught out in the location that obviously he'd been caught out, and how.
So we're here to talk to you about Sarah. I'll show you a picture. Do you know Sarah?
I don't know.
Okay. Sarah went missing. I'll show you some pictures of her on the day.
Okay.
Sarah went missing on Wednesday, and her parents obviously and her family are really worried about her now. The inquiry that's been conducted so far has led us to come and speak to you about it and to see what we know about Sarah, okay? So, would you like to, do you know where Sarah is?
No.
Right. Okay. Do you know anything about what happened to her?
I know that she went missing up in London somewhere, about a week ago or so, just from what I got on the news.
Okay. Have you ever personally met her?
No, not personally, no.
Have you had any interactions with her at all?
No, why would I have personal interactions with her?
Well, it's very difficult because I can't go into a lot of the evidence because obviously that's not part of what an urgent interview is, okay? This interview is just about trying to find her. Because
Sure.
she's been missing for a while
Well,
now.
I'm sat in handcuffs and asking me what I know her, so you must have something to say that I know her.
Well, as I said, you've been arrested on suspicion of kidnap, and we believe that you've been involved in her disappearance and taking her away from her family.
Okay.
So we are trying to find her. Obviously, everybody is very worried about her. She's got, parents. She's got, she's got siblings. She's got a boyfriend. There's a lot of people that care about her.
Sure.
If you've seen her on the news, the number of people that are reaching out about her.
Sure.
They're looking for her every day, and she's missing. And our job, our primary job here, is to find her and to try and find her safe and well.
Okay.
Now, we believe that you know something about where she is, and that's why we're here, to look for her and to try and find her. And that's why we're talking to you now, is to try and get you to have a good think about it and tell us anything you can about whether or not we're to find her.
Okay. Well, I am in financial, and I've been lent on by I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. So I said, not happening. And it then came through that they're going to harm my family, take them away, and they'll use them instead. At that point I had no option to try and find somebody. So I don't, there's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know. And to this group of people.
Tell me about them. I need to find them. Tell me everything you know that I
Okay.
hope that you'll help me.
There
find.
was a white Sprinter van. They it was between sort of Lenham, Maidstone area that I dropped her off. I still don't know. I don't know. They just I just parked my car up, and then the van come up behind me, flashed me. They all jumped out, and then they took this girl. They said, you've done good, and I don't know whether my family's going to be alright still, but they threatened to take my family away from me. So at that point, I'm doing what I can to protect my family. That's it. So all I know is that it was a roundabout. We could drive there now. I could show you. But roughly, I don't know Lenham, Maidstone area at all.
If we did it on Google, if we did it on Google Maps, like Google Earth, if we drove it, would
Right.
you be able to do it?
I drove from Ashford to Maidstone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
There's a roundabout that breaks up, I guess. So this is the first big roundabout. pub you come to. You would carry straight over to Maidstone, but instead I went round that roundabout and back up another road, and at that point I was flashed and pulled over. You guys got out, opened my door, opened that door, pushed me out against the front of the car, took the girl, drove off. That's it. They said we'll be in touch. So I'm here, I'm off work with stress because I'm here to protect my family. I want to be here 24/7 for my family. They come from my family. I've got nothing myself. I've got no choice.
I'll go back through the route with you in a minute, alright? But how do they contact you? How did you contact them?
I tried to phone one of their call girls and rip her off. So she's told them, and they've got me. So
how do they? No, but how do they contact you? How is it they've been in contact with you to make these threats?
They just tell me, be here. So Hotel Burston down in Folkestone, got to be here. Okay, so I turned up. But I've got no mobile number, and they have got my mobile number. They're obviously outside watching, following. I just, honestly.
How are they telling you to be there? How is it they're giving you those directions?
Yeah, they'll come outside. So they'll be outside here.
Yeah.
And then they'll say, right, you're going to be in Folkestone at this time, or you're going to be in Ashford at this time. And that's it. There's no links, no telephone numbers. I'm completely on my own, but at the same time being threatened. It had Romanian plates on the van, white, like Mercedes Sprinter type van.
So as you can see, he has turned around and tried to tell the officers that he was threatened by a gang because he'd underpaid a prostitute, and it was ordered for him to go and bring him a woman because they said if he didn't, they would harm his family. And obviously we know that isn't true. And then while he was actually in the cells overnight, he was then arrested on suspicion of murder. So how did we get here? Like, how did they find out that it was Wayne Couzens? How did they track him? So obviously whenever there is a crime, it has to be investigated, and the police do so much investigating and they have so many resources, which you'd have thought that Wayne Couzens would have known this, but he obviously was he was possibly arrogant enough to think he wouldn't get caught. I don't know, maybe he wanted to get caught, but they do their investigations. So during the investigation, the police had connected Couzens to the rental car, which he'd obviously paid for using his personal banking card. Not the best move. Following the reports of Sarah having gone missing and the descriptions that were then put out of Sarah, what she was wearing, as you can see on the poster up above there, you can see the clothes that she was wearing. There was a desperate search for her whereabouts, and she was wearing the white beanie hat with the navy bluey white trousers and the top turquoisey and orange. And she had running shoes on and like a mint rain jacket, as you can see in that picture. And because of the concern, there was a big social media appeal, and friends and family went round and posted out there lots of different posters for people to come forward if they knew anything, or where to come, if they had seen her, to trigger people's memories, because posters like that do generally trigger people. Oh, I might have seen that person, or I think I've seen them, that kind of thing. Or if they haven't, if they see her, then they know that she's a missing person and to contact the number on there. So the search and rescue teams at this time then start to scour the nearby ponds, and specialist officers, they trawl Clapham Common for clues, and they also look at Agni Riley Gardens and the Poinders Garden Estate. During this time, the police visited 750 homes and received 100 calls, and the response from the public was massive. And at this point, there seemed to be little sense of what happened to Sarah. There wasn't anything big that said this is what had happened, this is where she's been seen here, she's been seen there, despite the number of homes and calls they visited and received. So as I said, the initial search didn't bring any information immediately about Sarah or her whereabouts. However, obviously with every case, where they can, if there are CCTV cameras or there's doorbell cams or dash cams, that kind of thing, they are often ask people to come forward. If they see a vehicle on CCTV and they get the registration, they can make contact and ask to see or speak to people within those the car. So they've got a lot of things at their disposal. However, obviously, they viewed the CCTV, they viewed the Ring doorbell camera, which is obviously where they first were able to start tracking Sarah to the point where she then wasn't seen again. And then through the CCTV and the dash cam footage and the camera on the bus, they were then able to track movements, and that then led them to Wayne Couzens. And on the 10th of March, Sarah's remains were actually discovered because the police were searching Hodeswood and they found human remains in a large bag approximately 100 metres from the plot of land that Wayne Couzens owned. And so obviously they then had her body. They obviously tracked Wayne Couzens and he was then arrested for murder, and it was confirmed to be Sarah through her dental records, because of how he had disposed of her body and the fact that he'd burnt it would have made it impossible for police to identify who she was. And they continued their search around the area. They had like a search operation and they sort of walked approximately 1 square mile of the town, and they continued to comb the woodland because they obviously wanted to get as much evidence as they could. And when they were searching underwater, that's when they found Sarah's mobile phone. So as I said, he'd obviously initially been arrested for kidnapping or suspicion of kidnapping, and then they upgraded that to murder, as I said, on the 10th of March, because they'd obviously got her remains. And he was also then hospitalised, and the reason that he ended up being hospitalised in police custody was because he had deliberately banged his head on the toilet bowl in his cell. So obviously that delayed everything because he had to be seen in hospital, and he'd obviously, for whatever reason, wanted to hurt himself. And again, we know that he had mental health issues, but I mean that must have been quite a hard bang because it's porcelain, and obviously they don't want him to get ill or die in their custody. And so obviously they will have had to have sought treatment and just check him over, make sure he wasn't concussed. And I feel that was probably like a delay tactic. I don't know that for fact. That's how I feel that's what it would be, like it was a delay tactic. So why else would you bang your head on a porcelain toilet? Because that's going to hurt and can potentially be quite dangerous. So, as I mentioned at the very beginning, Wayne Couzens had an extensive back history. He had gained the nickname of the Rapist, and this nickname came about when he was working in the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, and this was due to his behaviour around female colleagues who he made feel uncomfortable. So there's the first point. You know, he's done something like this. Why has this been allowed to go on? Why was this not followed up? Because he clearly had behaviours of sexual deviance quite within it, you know, early in his career, and this was allowed to go on. It was ignored, I don't know, but obviously nothing was done, and so his history then continues. And it's been known that Chief Inspector Sir Tom Windsor admits that he was aware of the nickname of the rapist that Wayne Couzens was given, and he was also aware that he had an extreme like for pornography, and he had drug abuse. So there is someone higher up, a chief inspector, knowing that on his team he's made women feel uncomfortable, he has a nickname of the rapist, and he's got a like for extreme pornography and drug abuse. How is he allowed to even stay within the force if he is abusing drugs? A colleague also came forward and said that he agrees, he backs up the statement and confirmed that he was aware of Wayne's attraction to pornography and around his sexual desire of sexual violence towards women. So we're building up a bunch of people here that know what he's like. Now, I know people look after their own in, you know, these type of work environments and things like that, but still, something like that is completely different. You know, if someone's had an accident, it was an accident. Some people are kind of, you know, they might try and cover it up or whatever, not that that's justified, but they do look out for each other. But when it's obvious and it's known that he is a danger to women and he's in a role of responsibility and trust, that he shouldn't have continued. He shouldn't have been allowed to have continued. They should have got him help and removed him from the position that he was in, because he was a risk to women at the end of the day, and they allowed him to continue in his job. It was then also discovered later that Wayne Couzens was a member of a WhatsApp group. Now, this consisted of 5 other serving officers, and all of them are under investigation for the messages. They were apparently discriminatory messages, and they were chatting back in 2019, and they said that the messages were grossly offensive and indecent and obscene, and they were menacing in character. And so those police officers were also investigated, and there's a little bit of an update on that as I get towards the end. So it's concerning to me that there's people within the police force that are doing this, have done this, and these are the ones that got found out. What about the ones we don't know? In fact, there was a case where police officers were sharing through WhatsApp photographs of corpses. So it goes on. It's not just Wayne Couzens, it goes on within the police force, which is really, really worrying, you know, because when somebody's passed away or there's been a murder and the police are there, you're expecting them to look after your loved one's deceased body with respect, not take pictures of it and then, you know, laugh and make jokes about it. It's just such a concern. And back in 2015, there were past allegations of sexual misconduct by Wayne Couzens, and they were alleged to have been missed by the police, and this is also under investigation, and the police vetting procedures are under investigation. Although, as far as I was aware, the police are thoroughly investigated, like I said. So there's obviously been some kind of lack of fully completing a background check and vetting and obviously carrying out procedures. If there's a procedure that there's a 2-year, probation period, then that should be honoured. You shouldn't be allowed to just not complete the probation period, because who knows what they would have picked up during the probation period, because you do get to see and learn. They are kind of supervised, and behaviours and things may have been picked up sooner other than by the few people that saw it and ignored it. And we still go on, because Wayne Couzens had a history of being reported for indecent exposure. And I read that he'd gone through a McDonald's twice with only his top of clothes on, so he had no underwear or trousers on. So when he went to pay for the food and obviously collect the food, the staff in the windows will have seen what he had to offer, because he had no pants or trousers on. And this has obviously now been investigated as well, because they want to see whether or not that was dealt with appropriately. So even if it turns out that it was dealt with appropriately, how is he allowed to be a police officer with a history of indecent exposure? Many police failings I'm picking up here with this chappie, and it's quite scary. It really is, because people trust the police. That's what they're here for. And this guy has got you can see he's got an extensive history of different things, and he somehow managed to hide all of that or have it overlooked so that he could continue within his job, which he then later abused to abduct and rape and murder poor Sarah. During the investigations, they also found that Couzens had spent a month travelling backwards and forwards to London, and this was to see how best to commit this crime, and he had no explanation for it. He visited the capital on the 23rd of January, the 5th of February and the 14th of February, so this showed a degree of preparation and length of time that it was extended over, that he was obviously doing this to see, how long it would take him to plan the route if he needed to divert, because obviously he would have needed to have had a reason to, be somewhere and be back at the time that he says. And so obviously he's really well thought that out, and to make sure that he can do the driving within the time frames that he needs to do them back and forth as well. Now, as part of the sentencing remarks, there was quite a lot. I've taken some bits where I feel that they're relevant, and I felt this was quite relevant because it talked about the premeditation side of it. So he'd bought the kit with him, so what he needed to handcuff his victim. He also bought a handcuff key from Amazon on the 10th of February, which blew my mind that you could even buy a police standard issue handcuff key on Amazon. It's very concerning to me, actually. And this was found in his Seat. He'd also put in his car some self-adhesive carpet protector film that he'd purchased on the 28th of February. It was delivered on March the 1st, and he'd also bought hairbands, which was purchased in a shop on March the 3rd at 8 p.m. Now, it is said that they didn't know the purpose for the protector film, but the hairbands, the judge said, was for use either to maintain an erection, obviously so he could rape Sarah, or as a means of restraint. And this wasn't disputed, but neither did Wayne Couzens confirm. He also goes on to say the investigations showed that he'd hired the car on the 28th of February and he'd driven it to London on March the 3rd. He parked his car in Dover, and as there were no houses close by, so in my opinion he did that so that if Sarah had have resisted what he was doing and was screaming and shouting, there wouldn't have been anyone to hear, and this would have been obviously while he was trying to transfer her from the hire car into his car. He said that there's a lot of planning involved in this, down to leaving his car in the quiet location, and he'd also scoped out his journey to see which is the best route, and that he told his wife that he was working on a night shift, which he said he'd done that so that he knew which was the best route to take, and he would have had to have planned that journey, like I said earlier, to ensure he was able to get back on time. And in doing some of this planning, he also made several mistakes, and that led him to get caught. So the dash cam footage, the judge said, and the CCTV were not considered in his planning of taking Sarah, and it took 5 minutes for Couzens to get her in his car, and just in that short space of time he was able to get caught. So in summarising those factors and looking at whether or not this was premeditated, the judge said, on the one hand, it's almost inconceivable that the defendant did not realise that he'd not be able to allow his victim to actually live, given that he'd posed to her as a police officer, a revelation which would have greatly narrowed the range of suspects down. So that's a valid point, and he must have known that he couldn't have gotten away with that. He then said he made no attempt to disguise himself to prevent Sarah from seeing any registration numbers, because obviously they had been picked up, and disguising the make and models of the cars. And she would have been able to have described the locations to where she'd been driven, having seen town and street signs en route. So again, he's addressing the things that he hadn't obviously planned for, or he knew about but didn't put any steps in place to obviously protect himself. So was that a factor in the fact that he knew he was going to murder her? So then he didn't need to think of those things because she wasn't going to be a problem. His identification based on the information from Sarah would have been inevitable, but counterbalancing that, he actually didn't burn her body the night that he killed her. He'd obviously left, and then he had returned to then burn her body and dispose of the remains. So the judge concluded that given the planning and the thought that went into the kidnapping and the rape of his victim, the defendant must have realised that he may well need to kill the woman he intended to abduct and rape. But this did not become a definite outcome until the events had started to unfold, and he'd got the measure, as it were, that he would need to do this, having attacked her, because she would identify him and all of those other things there that the judge said. And that makes sense to me. So maybe initially he wasn't thinking that, and then when he's in it, he's then thinking, oh crap, I've got this to deal with. How do I, because now she's going to tell everyone who I am, and she knows I'm a police officer, and then he kills her. But we won't know, and Wayne Couzens has never actually said whether that was his intention. He just pleaded guilty to obviously the murder. Now, we do know that he had mental health issues, and that was something the defence asked to be considered when he was being sentenced, and they had a psychiatric evaluation carried out as well. And as I said, we know that he banged his head on that toilet bowl. I personally, like I said, think it was deliberate to delay and distract from what was actually going on so he could be taken to hospital, because obviously he knows the police policies and knows if he's injured he's going to have to go and be assessed in hospital. So he was actually charged with Sarah's kidnapping and murder on the 12th of March. So that's quite a quick turnaround, because obviously she went missing on the 3rd. They didn't find her immediately, but from finding her to actually convicting or charging him with murder was quite fast, I think, from the 3rd to the 12th of March. And following authorisation from the Crown Prosecution Service, he then appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court on the 13th of March, and he was then remanded in custody before he appeared at the Old Bailey, and he appeared via a video link. from Belmarsh Prison on the 16th of March. And during investigations, they obviously had to speak to his wife. His wife's called Wayne Couzens, and she said she saw no signs that he was acting strangely before he carried out the crimes. She obviously had been with him married to him for 15 years, and she claims to have been as puzzled as everyone else as to why her husband had killed a complete stranger. So obviously, was she aware of his sexual deviant behaviours, like the violent sexual behaviours? Obviously we don't know what their sexual relationship was together. That might have been something that they kind of consented to. They might not have, and so she may not have even known that kind of thing about him, because obviously when someone is like that, they do tend to keep it very private, and they do tend to find other people to do that with, usually prostitutes, where there's no emotion and no connection, and obviously where they can't get caught for it. And prostitutes will usually obviously try and do what the client wants them to do. So she may not have seen any of this. She may have just been living in a bubble. She obviously had felt like she'd been happily married. She did comment on his mental health and sort of said about him being a manic depressive, and she did say, like, if she'd known what was going on in his head, this wouldn't have happened, but I didn't know anything. And she said he didn't act strangely around her, and she didn't notice that anything was wrong with him. And obviously I guess with his job, shift work, it's difficult to keep tag on anyone, and if they're working, and if you're doing overtime, and often these officers will work over their time anyway, so you can't go by how often he's working and when he's not, because he could have been doing overtime or been late quite a lot. That's just part of the job. But she was very apologetic to Sarah's family, and she said although she hurts, obviously, because she's lost her marriage and lost the person she thought she knew, because obviously now he's done what he's done, obviously that's ended their relationship and her love, so there's a grief there because she didn't know, and she's now dealing with that. But she said her sadness is nothing in comparison to obviously Sarah's family's sadness. And she just said, there was no glimpse of violence. There was nothing that led her to be concerned with, her husband's behaviour. To her, he was just, normal, and in her world, they were both happy. So following the investigations and the court hearings, and actually that was quite a quick turnaround as well, because obviously by March 2022 he'd been convicted of Sarah's murder, so he was actually handed a whole life prison term for her abduction and for killing her, and he was then imprisoned at HM Prison Frankland in County Durham. And then he was charged with a further 4 counts of indecent exposure, which was related to other allegations that had been made. He did plead not guilty via the video link from the prison. He then later mounted an appeal, and he said that he should have been given credit for admitting his crimes, and the crimes he was obviously admitting to was the murder and raping of Sarah. I don't think it was in relation to the indecent exposure charges and things like that, but he felt he should be given credit. I totally disagree, and he wasn't actually given. His appeal was turned down, and he did want to try and come out before his 90th birthday, and the chief judge said no. And that is something we can be thankful for, that man will never abuse anyone else and have an abuse of power again in any other situation. Now, recently, as I said earlier, there was a few other police officers involved in the WhatsApp chat group. So 2 of them, PC Jonathan Coburn and PC Joel Borders, they were jailed for multiple counts of sending grossly offensive messages on a public communication network, which included obviously the sexual messages and racist messages, homophobic messages. The messages were just disgusting beyond the point where they received, a jail sentence for them. The judge presiding the case closes the case by saying to Wayne Couzens, you kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah, having long planned a violent sexual assault on a yet to be selected victim who you intended to coerce into your custody. You have irretrievably damaged the lives of Sarah Everard's family and her friends in ways in which I have, at least in part, referred. Mrs. Everard devastatingly referred to how the wider world has now lost its appeal for her, and I would add no doubt for many others who cared for your victim. And Sarah Everard's sister referred to the inescapable reality of the many lives you have ruined. You have eroded the confidence that the police are entitled to have in the police force of England and Wales. It's critical that every subject in this country can trust police officers when they encounter them and submit to their authority, which they are entitled to believe is being exercised in good faith. You have utterly betrayed your family, your wife and your children, who, on all the evidence, are entirely blameless, and you have to live with the ignominy of your dreadful crimes for the rest of your lives. You have very considerably added to the sense of insecurity that many have living in our cities, perhaps particularly women when travelling by themselves, especially at night. During the period before your arrest, there was never a moment when you gave the slightest indication of any regret, following perhaps the realisation of the enormity of the dreadful crimes you committed, and instead you have simultaneously attended the inconsequential details of family life whilst grimly covering your tracks, and with all the appearance of a man acting with a quiet and unconcerned determination. The substantial CCTV footage and similar material does not give the slightest hint of someone in any trauma who had second thoughts in the cold light of day about what they did, and notwithstanding your guilty pleas, and therefore I have seen no evidence of a genuine contrition on your part, as opposed to evident self-pity and attempts by you to avoid or minimise the proper consequences of what you have done. Wayne Couzens, you have been sentenced to a whole life term for kidnap, rape and the murder of Sarah Everard. The full details of his crimes are deeply concerning and raise entirely legitimate questions. This is the most horrific of crimes, and we recognise this as part of the bigger and troubling pictures. There have been other murders of women in public spaces, including the killings of Nicole Smallman and Biber Henry, and this very recent Sabina Nessa. All of these bring into sharp focus our urgent duty to do more to protect women and girls. And understanding the concerns of women in London is really important. So this is the police giving their statement, and they are undertaking a range of activities so they can better listen and respond. Wayne Couzens' crimes are the most extreme example of betrayal, and they have been shattering for everybody. And of course, people have questions about the integrity of officers. We only want the best in the Metropolitan Police, and we will always act when our employees fall below the standards we and the public expect and erode the trust we depend on. I question that, because they obviously didn't with Wayne Couzens. Whether they do that now, we will see. Maybe after investigation, they've found where areas are lacking and have implemented, but they severely failed Sarah massively. All officers must and will now be expected to work harder to gain the confidence of the public and be understanding and tolerant of reasonable questioning of their actions. And I guess as they're, if they're questioning and arresting people, they are allowed within reason to question and ask for their identity, as they do go protecting people in London. So what they have done is they've outlined some steps, and I thought I'm going to put them in here and read them, because if this can apply anywhere. You can take these steps to protect yourself as a lone person, whether it be a man or a woman, because men are attacked as well. So here are some of those measures, and hopefully you can keep those in the back of your mind. So should you get stopped and you have concerns about anything, then you have these, you can use these in your back of your mind to protect yourself, and obviously question things if you need to. So start off with, they've appointed somebody to conduct. The name of the person is Baroness Casey, and she's of Blackstock, to conduct a review of the Metropolitan Police culture and the standards in order to begin rebuilding the public trust. There's been a new published action plan for tackling violence against women and girls, prioritising action against sexual and violent predatory offenders, specialist predatory offendering units. They've got 650 new officers into the busy public places, including those where women and girls often lack confidence that they are safe. There will be more reassurance with patrols and increased police presence in key hotspot locations where offences usually happen, especially violent ones or ones of harassment. There's an urgent review of all current investigations into allegations of sexual misconduct and domestic abuse against officers and their staff, to make certain those made are properly supported and that they are investigated comprehensively. An urgent dip sample from the last 10 years where sexual misconduct and domestic abuse allegations were made, and those who were accused that have remained in the Metropolitan Police, ensure that appropriate management, including vetting reviews, are to be undertaken. A root branch review of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Police Command, with a particular focus on recruiting, vetting, culture and professional standards and supervision, and an increase to the number of investigators with professional standards to strengthen their proactive capability and prevent instances of our people abusing the positions that they are in. And they also go on to say for the public that it is unusual for a single plainclothes police officer to engage with anyone. If you find yourself in an interaction with a lone police officer in plainclothes and you are on your own, that officer will provide verification of their identity by putting you in direct contact with their colleagues in the local police operations room. This will be by using a video call, and it can be your own device or the officer's device, and you'll be able to see and speak to a uniformed police officer in what will be visible by a police operations room, and they'll be able to conduct the necessary checks and provide assurance that that officer is who they say they are and that they are acting appropriately. And if you need to, you can still call 999 to ask for verification of an officer's identification for your own reassurance. So as you can see, with this case, there was quite a lot of information in terms of Wayne Couzens and his background, and obviously as they did their investigations, they learned more about him and more about his history came forward, and it's taken this case to obviously bring about those changes that they are implementing, and it is really good, and it is a move in in the right direction. However, obviously it didn't help Sarah, and at the hands of Wayne Couzens, he took her life and he stole her from all of those who loved her. But that is all for now, and I will hopefully see you all very soon on the next podcast. Take care for now. If you see something, say something. It's better to say something than nothing at all. So see you all again very soon. Bye for now. Bye. It's something, but it's better to